Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to the channel. Currently out for a walk on this nice Monday morning to talk about my session at Hustler Casino Live last Wednesday. Now, this session in particular, I'm sure most of you guys did not watch. Reason being, Hustler got blocked from streaming on YouTube for like a week. I think they got a strike on their channel. But long story short, they couldn't stream on YouTube last week, which means they used Twitch. Now, a lot of you guys probably don't use Twitch, or you do and you had no idea. Whatever the case is, I bet most of you have not seen these hands, so it should be interesting. Before we jump into the poker, I wanted to remind you all, or let you know, if you didn't know already, my band, Dear Delta, has officially released our album on Apple Music, Spotify, YouTube, whatever streaming platform you guys use. Technically, it's a EP, which is essentially a short album. Would love it if you guys check that out. Let me know what you think. And we're also gonna be playing some shows later this year. So if you guys are interested in checking us out live, I'll let you guys know where and when. Anyway, that's enough talking. Let's jump straight into some poker and I'll check in with you guys right after. All right, everyone, back again at Hustler Casino Live. Today we are playing 25-50, essentially 25-50-100 since the straddle is always on. And in this first interesting hand, I raise up the action to $300 with Queen Jack suited. Henry re-raises to 1,000 on the button, and when it gets back around to me, I decide to make the call. Could also re-raise with this hand once in a while, but call seems pretty normal as well. Heads up to a flop of 10-4-4 with one club. Not too shabby, all things considered. We've got two overs, a backdoor straight draw, and a backdoor flush draw. I check, and now Henry down bets to 400. This is a really small bet. Against such a small size, I think we could have a lot of check raises. That includes any 10, of course a 4, even middling pocket pairs for some protection. And then we got to mix in some bluffs. I think this one is a perfect candidate for all the reasons I just listed earlier. So I decide to raise it up. I make it 1,400. Would be great to get folds from ace high, king high, and those kind of holdings. Henry makes the call, however, which is also fine since we have these backdoor possibilities. And we kind of get there right away, I think. It's the Jack of Diamonds giving me top pair. So we're going to switch from bluffing to value betting. I put in $1,300. And now Henry raises it up to 5,600. Pretty weird hand developing now with this raise from him. But we've got top pair and we're beating all potential bluffs, which Henry could certainly have. He might even be raising a hand like ace 10 for some thin value. Most players probably wouldn't, but Henry does click random buttons from time to time. So I make the call. And we see a decent river card. It's the 4 of spades, meaning any jack we're now chopping with. I guess that's also a bit comforting since we might have been up against ace jack or king jack. Anyway, I check it over to him, and now Henry puts in a bet of $11,000, which is around 2/3 the size of the pot. Non-decision here, obviously not going to raise, folding out of the question, so I make the call, and we are up against quads. That's right, my man has 8-4 suited, top full house versus 4 of a kind. Kind of a cooler, pretty big cooler actually, but we end up not losing too much. The pot doesn't even reach $40,000, so I guess all things considered, not the worst result ever, but of course would have preferred to win this one. In the next hand, Ling Lin opens up the action to 400, and I look down at Jack 10 suited on the button. Similar to the previous hand, you could mix between raising or just calling, since we are on the button. This time I decide to take the aggressive route. I make it 1,200 to go, and only she makes the call, so we go heads up in position to a board of 10-8-7 rainbow. No spades out there, but we still have top pair and a straight draw, so when she checks, I decide to keep betting. I put in 1,300. She makes the call, and we see the 4 of clubs on the turn. She checks again, and this time, even though betting is probably okay, I decide to check it back. Not really sure if we can get 3 streets from worse, so I pot control since facing a check raise would be pretty brutal with my exact hand. River is interesting. It's the Jack of Diamonds giving me top 2 pair. Normally that's a super good hand, but here any 9 makes a straight, so a little bit sketchy. However, she checks it to me a 3rd time, and I think that's the green light to go for some value. If she's got a weaker 2 pair or even a non-believing single pair, we might get called by that. And if she had a straight, I feel like she would have just let out on this river since I checked back on the turn. For all those reasons, I decide to put in a value bet of $2,800. She thinks it over for quite some time and eventually decides to call. Looks like decent news, and sure enough, it is. Top 2 pair is good. We take down this $10,000 pot. In this next hand, the $200 straddle is on. There's a raise from Armenian Matt to 500. Ling Ling calls, Dr. P calls on the button, and I look down at 9-6 suited. Hearts variety in the small blind. Pretty terrible hand, but the memes, you know what I mean? 9-6 suited, also known as Big Lick, in the heart variation no less, is about as good of a 9 high as it gets. So I decide to go on a little adventure. I make it $3,500 to go. Back around to Matt, who's the original raiser. He makes the call. Jokes aside, part of the reason why I decided to squeeze with this hand was, of course, the dead money from so many callers in the field, but also the fact that I felt like Matt was going to play pretty straightforward, so my hand will be easy to navigate. Anyway, he makes a call, Ling Ling makes the call, Dr. P folds, 3 ways to a flop of 9-8 deuce with 1 heart. So that's top pair, and a backdoor flush draw, backdoor straight draw, about as good as it gets for Big Lick. I decide to bet around half pot, $5,000. Matt folds, Ling Ling does not fold. Instead, she jams all in for just a hair more. She's got like $5,200 or $5,300. I, of course, call, and we're off to the races. Running at once here. Turn is a queen, river is a jack, and we win versus 8-7 suited. Kind of funny that Matt would have rivered the nuts, but as per usual, 9-6 never loses. Isn't that the saying? Anyway, in the next one, things get a bit weird pre-flop. Yeah, even weirder than 9-6 suited. Francisco limps in for $100. Matt raises to $1,400. Now, these two guys, I believe, are the last remaining players in a stand-up game, which means they're incentivized to try to win a pot desperately. I look down at pocket sevens in the small blind and decide to do something kind of weird, which is min raise Armenian Matt. Reason being is I thought Francisco might jam all in, since he does like to limp and then go all in once in a while. So I put in the raise to 2,700, trying to get Armenian Matt out. Looking back, this doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but it is kind of funny. Francisco now does jam all in for 10,000, and then Matt immediately jams all in for 25,000. I have some history with Matt. I've seen him play quite a bit, and the speed at which he did this, plus his mannerisms, etc., it kind of gave me vibes of 2 overcards. I know this is kind of a ridiculous analysis, but I'm just keeping it honest with you guys. It just didn't feel like a pair. Now, of course, I could be wrong. You know, we're never 100% certain on these things, but I'm just giving you my real-time thoughts. Francisco's hand, I'm not too worried about it. He could have any 2 cards. If he's got me beat, I'm happy to give him action. However, if Armenian Matt has a bigger pair, that's really bad. If he's got 2 overs, we're flipping, so it's not looking great. At the same time, we're getting a decent price, and I'm here to give some action in a game like this with this sort of lineup. So eventually, after thinking it over for a minute or 2, I make the call, and I'm happy to hear that we are in good shape with these pocket sevens. We decided to run it twice, though, so hopefully we can hold on both boards. But sadly, the first river brings an ace. Second board is safe though, so I end up chopping this one with Armenian Matt, meaning that we essentially just split Francisco's $10,000. I'll take it. In the next hand, Ling Ling raises to 400. I'm in middle position with 8-7 suited. I think raising this hand is probably the best course of action, since I don't want to call and get squeezed out, so I decide to make it 1,500. Sounds ridiculous, but folding from time to time is probably fine too. You didn't hear that from me though. Anyway, Henry re-raises now from the small blind. He makes it 6,000. Ling Ling makes the call, and I've got position, plus Henry and I are pretty deep. So if my hand connects, we could win a huge pot if he's got a big pair or something like that. I make the call, and we go 3 ways to a flop of King 7-3 with 2 hearts. So we've got middle pair, but not much else aside from that. It's also a king high board, which is generally not going to be great since Henry did 4-bet pre-flop. He continues for a bet of 6,000. Ling Ling folds, and of course I can't fold middle pair. We could improve on the turn, and of course might have the best hand if he's got something like ace queen or ace jack suited, for example. So I stick around, and we're off to a turn which is not great. It's the jack of hearts. If he was re-raising pre-flop with a suited ace of hearts, for example, which in this instance he does have, we of course are now drawing dead. He also improves if he's got a hand like ace jack or queen jack suited, all those sorts of holdings that might have bluffed on the flop. At this point, if he bets again, we're going to have to ditch it. That's exactly what happens. He puts in some more chips. I don't even know how many, but I let it go right away. So many better hands we could have, and it's nice to look back and see that he had the nuts. So We put money in on the flop when we were ahead and then folded the turn. Not too shabby, but of course would have been nicer to make the best hand post flop. Moving right along, in this next one, I've got 10-9. Suited once again, this time we have diamonds. There's a raise from Matt. I make it 1,600 in the small blind, and now Dylan puts in a raise to $5,000. Back around to me, and well, with a suited connector out of position, against someone who has a short stack, it's a much different story. This is a very easy fold on paper. However, you guys might have heard me say this kind of thing before. Dylan is somebody that I try to give action to whenever I can. He's one of those guys that I play regularly with who isn't trying to take the game too seriously and is here for a good time. So any player who shows up with that approach, I try to reciprocate that energy to an extent, at least. You know, I'm not going to give away free money, but all that to say, I think 10-9 suited here is a call in this particular situation. So I toss in the money and we're off to a flop of king 7 deuce with 2 diamonds. So we flop a flush draw. I check it over to him and he checks it back. Turn card brings even more improvement. It's the 8 of clubs. So we're now open-ended with a flush draw. That's a lot of outs, but I decide to check it again and go for a check raise if he stabs or bluff the river. Sure enough, he does put in a bet of $4,000. Now he might be doing this with some random ace highs that check back the flop. He could have an under pocket pair to the king, if you guys know what I mean, like, you know, pocket 9s through queens. And all those hands are going to be in a tough spot versus a jam all in, which is what I do. Unfortunately, Dylan snap calls, so it looks like he was trapping on the flop with either an overpair or a king, maybe even a set of kings. Either way, none of that matters because we need to improve to win. I've got 10 high. That's not going to get it done. Off to a river. We decide to run it once, and we don't get there. It's the 4 of spades. Probably not going to win this one. We don't even beat 6-5 suited now. So, yeah, nice hand, Dylan. Ace king is good. This next hand is much more straightforward, if you will. There's a raise to 600 from Alex. Francisco calls. I'm in the double straddle with queens. Of course, I'm going to raise it up. I make it 4,200. Back around to Alex now, who decides he's had enough of all this re-raising going on pre-flop, and he jams all in for around $13,000 or $14,000. Francisco makes the hero fold with 10-9 offsuit, and of course, I make the call. He asked to run it twice. I usually don't have a problem with this sort of thing, so we're off to see 2 boards. Sadly, the first one is an 8. Now, of course, in the moment, I don't know that that's bad news because Alex is putting on one hell of a slow roll, which is totally fine. It was a friendly slow roll. I advocate for these whenever possible. Second board, we make a set, and yeah, that's how I ended up chopping $800 between me and Alex. We both hit a set, and yeah, a little bit of run bet to not scoop this pot with queens. Next, this hand comes up where action folds around to Matt. He opens it up to $700 from the small blind. Ling Ling calls. She's got 10-9 offsuit this time. She's in the big blind. I look down at king jack suited in the double straddle. Now, almost always, I think putting in a re-raise with king jack suited is the way to go, blind versus blind. But to touch on what I said earlier, I have a bit of history with Matt, and this time he seemed pretty strong to me, so I decided to just call with king jack suited. Also standard once in a while to do this even if you don't have a read, since you know, I'd imagine re-raising 100% of the time is not the way to go. Anyway, I make the call and we go 3 ways to a flop of jack 7 deuce with 1 heart, so that's top pair with a great kicker, backdoor flush draw as well. However, Matt seems undeterred. He continues for 1,600. Ling Ling makes the call with her straight draw. I make the call with top pair, and we're off to a turn which is the deuce of spades. Looks pretty sweet to me, but Matt doesn't seem to worry about it. He continues betting 3,200 this time. Ling Ling folds, and of course I cannot go anywhere just yet. We are beating essentially any bluff and even some value bets like queen jack or jack 10 suited, stuff like that. So I come along for 3,200 bucks, and we see the 7 of clubs on the river. All the draws break out, and now Matt decides to check it. Interesting spot now because I think a value bet is definitely in order, but we might value on ourselves versus over pairs or a hand like ace jack. Be that as it may, I would just have so many bluffs in this spot that I think checking back would be a huge crime. So I decide to go for a bet. In terms of sizing, I think a large bet makes the most sense. But as I assemble some chips and throw them in the pot, Matt lets go of his hand immediately, which is a bit surprising considering he had ace high with no diamond. If I was in his spot, I would have been pretty curious and might have even called, but he thinks better of it and just lets it go. We win this one with King Jack suited versus Ace King. A little bit of run good there. In this next one, there's a bunch of limpers, and I decide to limp along with Jack 4 of diamonds. Everyone and their mother goes to a flop, which comes down Queen 8-7 with 2 diamonds. I've got a flush draw, so I bet 400 bucks. Dylan calls on my left, but then Dr. P check raises on my direct right. He makes it 3,400. Pretty big raise. I think he's probably got like 2 pair or top pair at the minimum, and it looks like I was dead wrong because my man has a straight draw, and that's about it. Nice play from Dr. P. Unfortunately for him, I've actually got a hand that I'm going to continue with every time. I've got a flush draw, I've got position, so I toss in the money. Dylan gets out of the way, and we go to a turn which immediately brings some help. It's the 3 of diamonds, so we finally make a big hand today. Actually, we made a full house earlier, but it wasn't any good. So we finally make a big hand that's good. Dr. P checks, and I decide to do something a bit sneaky and check it back. Part of the reason being is we could easily get all in on the river based on his stack size compared to the pot size. If we were both much deeper, I think a bet is in order, but I decide to check it back, see what he wants to do on the river. And we see the Queen of Hearts, which I gotta admit I had some mixed feelings about because I felt like his check raise on the flop could have been a hand like Queen 8 or Queen 7. Of course, 8-7 would now be counterfeit, but Queen 8 and Queen 7 now beat me, so I'm hoping he doesn't jam. I might even fold if he jams, but instead he decides to bet small. $2,500. Now I'm wondering, should I raise and try to get the max from a queen, or should I just call? Should I make some sick hero fold? I'm not doing that. Eventually I just call, and we win against 6 high. Good effort from Dr. P, but unfortunately he ran into a flush here. And with that, we arrive at the last hand of the night, which is not the craziest pot in the world, but it's a noteworthy one for me. In this one, there's a raise from Ling Ling to $800. I believe the 200 double straddle was on this hand. I look down at Ace 5 suited in middle position. Definitely worth a re-raise. We've got position. She's fairly deep at this point with around 50,000 in her stack. So of course I'm going to put in some more money with Ace 5 suited. I make it 2,800 to go. Back around to Ling Ling, who makes the call. So we go heads up to a flop of Ace 9-8 with a flush draw. She checks it over to me, and of course I've got top pair. That's a good flop, but what do we want to do? I think checking back sometimes is fine on this kind of board texture. We could be up against sets, better aces, combo draws. All those hands have me in not the best shape, but I decide to continue betting, which I also think is fine. I bet around half pot, $3,000. And now Ling Ling check raises really small. She makes it $8,000, giving me a really good price to continue. It's only 5K to call, and the pot is around 17,000. But despite having top pair in a re-raised pot, I just had a really weird feeling with this one. I felt like we could be drawing dead, which, as you guys can see, we almost are. And even if she had some sick draw like Jack 10 of spades or, you know, 6-7 of spades, hands like that, we're not in the best shape. So I decide to just ditch this one right on the flop, bet top pair, and then fold to a small check raise. And I was so happy to see, since we were playing the stand-up game, that she flopped top 2, so we end up losing what I think is the minimum. I mean, I guess you could argue she had the best hand all the way, but for me, this is what I would call a hero fold. Maybe for a lot of you guys out there, this is super easy, but I usually get pretty stubborn when I actually have something, and this time, deciding to let this one go ends up saving me some money, which I was quite happy with. Anyway, I know that was a bit anticlimactic to end the session with. A little bit unorthodox for this channel, but again, something I was quite proud of. That, ladies and gentlemen, was the last interesting hand of this particular session. As always, I hope you all enjoyed. Yeah, so as you guys saw, not the most exciting poker session for me. A little bit of run bad, no big value spots, and kind of card dead along the way too. So usually you mix all those things together, it's gonna result in a loss, and that was the case for myself. Now, it wasn't the biggest loss ever. It was around $20,000. Of course, that's a bunch of money. You could buy a car with that. You could buy a lot of sushi, but given the stakes of the game, it's like losing 2,000 bucks at a 5-10 game, which is not uncommon. Anyway, there's been a lot of turbulence for my poker year. Luckily, I'm up though, like $100,000 or $200,000 on the year, and there's still a few months left of it. So fingers crossed that things go well. And that's all I got for you guys today. Don't forget to check out my band Dear Delta's album. Click below to stream it on whichever platform you guys prefer. We also have a bunch more music coming out next year. We're doing a music video. We're putting together an album for 2025. So a lot of stuff in the works. Hopefully you guys enjoy the music. And that's it. As always, thank you for watching. Thanks for the support. And until next time, good luck at your local tables. Peace.